Welcome back to another episode of the Clever Cow Podcast, your go-to source for all things dairy sustainability. I'm your host, Savanah Nunes, Media and Communications Director for the Idaho Sustainable Agriculture Initiative for Dairy, or ISAID. For those of you who are new, ISAID is a Sustainable Agriculture Systems grant funded by NEFA and the USDA. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of soil health, dairy manure, and biochar, and how they all come together to improve agricultural sustainability. Our guest is Dr. Daniel Strawn, a professor of environmental soil chemistry at the University of Idaho and a key researcher on the ISAID grant. Dr. Strawn's work is helping to reshape how we think about soil management, nutrient recovery, and even water purification through an exciting innovation called the Clean Water Machine. In this episode, we'll explore how biochar, when combined with manure, creates a nutrient-rich soil amendment that improves soil health while addressing environmental concerns like nutrient leaching. Plus, we'll get into the Clean Water Machine and its role in revolutionizing water purification for dairy farms. From biochar's ability to sequester carbon to its potential impact on large-scale agriculture, this episode is packed with valuable insights. So, without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. Welcome, Dr. Strawn. So, Dan, could you start by sharing a bit about your background and how you became involved in environmental soil chemistry and the ISAID grant?
I trained at the University of Delaware, is where I did my PhD in environmental soil chemistry, and then I did a postdoctoral research associate at the University of California, Berkeley. And I was hired from there in the year 2000 to start here at the University of Idaho as an environmental soil chemistry professor. So over the years, I've worked on various issues. I'm in the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences, and one of the major issues in Idaho is helping the dairy industry be sustainable and profitable. And so there's a lot of issues with nutrients on the dairies, and it was just natural that I could apply some of my knowledge and research skills investigating how nutrients from dairy can be used and made more sustainable.
Awesome. So, for your role for the ISAID grant, what does that entail, and how does your research contribute to the overall goals of the project?
One of the major efforts that I'm focusing on is taking the nutrients from the dairy waste, the effluent and the solids, and recovering them and reusing them. So we're investigating technology to recover the nutrients. How do we get them out of this dairy waste? And then how can we use them to essentially recycle the nitrogen and phosphorus? I mean, those are fertilizers. So if we can figure out ways to recycle them essentially instead of wasting them, then it'll save money in fertilizers. It'll keep those nutrients out of the surface waters.
Yeah, definitely. From what I understand, the plant isn't really able to take in the full amount of nutrients from fertilizers or manure, so that ends up turning into runoff. So you kind of are able to capture that and give it to the plant at, I guess, a slower rate, or even take extra and kind of disperse it from there.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what we're looking at. I mean, it comes down to essentially there's a dairy concentrates these nutrients. They have a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen, and I mean, they use it, applying it to the fields around the dairy, but there's too much nitrogen and phosphorus. And so the research is really to discover how we can recover those and efficiently use them to add back into soils and make it, I mean, we can do that. We have the science and technology to do that, but really one of the challenges is how to do it economically.
Definitely. Yeah, especially in an area where it's so dairy dense down there in southern Idaho. So fields get over applied and it can cause buildup in certain nutrients.
Yeah, no, it all comes back to economics. I mean, everybody knows that this manure and dairy effluent has a lot of nutrients in it. It would be great to just apply it to soils and use as a fertilizer. However, it costs money to move that material.
Definitely.
And so we're researching ways to remove just the nitrogen and phosphorus and concentrate it so that we can then disperse it more economically to soils and use it as a fertilizer.
on the economic point, that'll in turn make manure more valuable too for the farmers.
Yeah.
Because usually they're kind of splitting the cost of transportation, the dairymen with the farmers.
Yeah.
So that can
Yeah,
be really
no,
beneficial as well.
it's really, we're trying to, essentially, this grant part of it is to enhance or enable the bioeconomy. And so we're trying to create a value added product. This is not just a waste, it actually has value. And if we can concentrate those nutrients, we increase the value and make them more easy to use and actually help offset the cost in transportation, because now they are a concentrated source of nutrients that can be offset. The farmer doesn't have to buy fertilizers.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about soil health. How does the application of manure affect soil health, both positively and negatively?
So animal manure, it generally is good for soil to a certain level. If you add too much, then you are overloading the soil with nitrogen, phosphorus, and that can run off into surface waters or leach into groundwaters, creating problems. So, in terms of soil health, you think of a healthy soil. Properties like it has a good texture, even it has lots of organic matter. So when you add manure or compost, then that really could improve the organic matter and the overall physical and chemical properties of the soil. So it makes it healthier. But like I said, there's a limit. Too much compost or manure amendment to the soil, it really just loads the nutrients too high, and then you end up with leaching that will deteriorate the surface water quality or leaching into groundwaters. And so we have major issues in the nation and around the world and in Idaho with surface water quality degradation. I mean, every summer they close down some parts of rivers for swimming because there's toxic algae blooms, or they're closed down, lakes because of the algae blooms. And it's all because there's too much phosphorus and nitrogen in the water. We also have issues with groundwater. Too much nitrogen in the groundwaters can impact the quality of the water. And so overloading the soils really enables those nutrients to leach out of the soil and go where they're not supposed to be, essentially the surface and groundwater.
It's such an amazing resource, but too much of a good thing is a bad thing.
Exactly.
I mean, across the board for anything you apply that to.
Yeah. So it just comes down to the fact that, okay, if we could disperse it, move it further away, then we could not overload the soils around the dairy producing areas. But again, it comes down to, well, that costs money. So how can we decrease that? If we can make it more concentrated, then the transportation costs would be less and we can disperse it further.
Definitely.
So that's where this research comes in. We're trying to do science to discover, well, how could we extract those nutrients, make them more concentrated and more valuable so that they can be dispersed out further from the dairy regions.
If you have soil and you apply the recommended amount of manure to it, where it's not leaching off and stuff,
Right.
What would that do to the soil?
Well, you're going to provide the nutrients that the plants need. So if you apply recommended amount, then the plants getting the nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients that it needs, and you get good plant growth, optimum yield, and you don't have to buy fertilizers or buy less fertilizers. You've added, with compost and manure additions, you've added a lot of organic matter to the soil, which is good. The microbial populations are usually healthy and doing a lot of good things in the soil that make plants happy. So ideally, an ideal amendment rate of manure or compost is a good thing.
I've also heard apparently the soil in southern Idaho lacks a certain amount of carbon too. So I was talking to April Latham and she mentioned that it could add more carbon back to the soil.
Probably referring to the carbon in soils. Well, there's two types. There's organic and inorganic, and there's plenty of inorganic carbon in the southern Idaho soil. So we're probably talking about just that increasing the organic carbon, which is soil organic matter. So really, if you think about a healthy soil, the color is probably dark, and that's that organic matter. So, or if you have a home garden and you want to increase the soil health or make better soil, you go to the nursery and buy some compost, take it home and mix it in. And it's that organic matter and those nutrients that are going to really make the soil healthier and more productive.
Definitely.
And so that's really what, and a lot of the soils in southern Idaho, they're relatively low in organic carbon, but around the dairies they get a lot.
Well, yes.
And so it's not, the organic carbon is not necessarily a bad thing. I really can't imagine you could add too much, but it's the nitrogen and phosphorus that's where we overload the soils, and they end up polluting the surface and groundwaters.
Speaking of that, what steps can be taken to mitigate the risks of nitrogen and phosphorus leaching when you're applying manure to fields?
Well, really, it comes down to application rates. You really, they need to do testing and tell you how much phosphorus and nitrogen you can add. And if you know how much is in your compost or manure, then you would add that amount. But that's easy to say. It's more complex. There's a lot of subtle factors that make it more or less accurate. Really, the concept that we're trying to innovate is coming up with new strategies, new technologies to concentrate the phosphorus and nitrogen and add it as fertilizer that is what we call an enhanced fertilizer. And one of the technologies that we're going to talk about today is using biochar as one of the ways to concentrate that phosphorus and nitrogen. And so that really is the technology that we're pursuing in this research, and looking for how we can recover that nitrogen and phosphorus and then add it back in the soil and how it behaves as a plant nutrient.
So you mentioned your research revolving around biochar and soil and water treatment. Can you explain what biochar is and why it's effective in these applications?
Yeah, so biochar is essentially, I guess in very simplest terms, you can think of about the charcoal that you buy to put in your barbecue. Essentially, that's pyrolyzed carbon, which is, think of it as, the charcoal was a piece of wood, and then they burn it, but without oxygen. So you heat it up without oxygen, and it turns into charcoal. So the biochar came about, a couple decades ago. Some scientists started looking at it and realized it has some good properties for soil, and can be produced from what we call waste biomass. So what is waste biomass? Think of after you harvest a crop, if you have, let's say, if you are harvesting wheat, you take the wheat grain off and then you have the stalks and the stems. Well, that's biomass. And so we can use that and pyrolyze it, essentially burn it in the absence of oxygen. And it turns into charcoal, or what we call biochar. So we can produce it from any waste biomass, including dairy manure, or we produce a lot of it from forest residues. So when they go out and harvest trees, there's a lot of material that's left behind, and we can create biochar from that. So you can, any type of biomass that we use and turn it into biochar, then it has value. And it has some real benefits of adding it to the soil, and I can discuss those. But what we're suggesting is, well, okay, we can produce this biochar from waste biomass, so that's positive of utilizing this waste biomass to produce something good for the soil. And then if we can integrate that in with this dairy waste water processing, get that nitrogen and phosphorus out of the dairy waste and put it on the biochar, now what we have is really valuable product. We're not just adding biochar to the soil, we can add biochar and recycled nutrients to the soil. And now that could be really valuable. We're recycling those nutrients, we're recycling the biomass, we're creating a product that's very good for the soil and could enhance crop production.
Yeah, I think it's an extreme advantage to take something that was once a waste product and turn it into something positive. Whenever I hear about byproducts, I always get chills and stuff because it makes me so excited, because I don't know, I feel like nothing in nature is a waste. You know what I mean? Like it can always be repurposed and made into some other material that is beneficial.
Yeah, no, that's the idea here, is really creating a circular bioeconomy. I mean, there's all of this material coming out of dairies, the manure and the effluent, and it's got a lot of nutrients in them. Rather than waste them, why don't we recycle them? And then we have all of this biomass that we can turn into biochar, and we can combine those, and it's really just essentially a whole recycling system, and utilizing waste to make a valuable product. And so one of the advantages of biochar for adding it to soils, so we're proposing we can enhance that biochar by adding phosphorus and nitrogen to it. That's obviously a fertilizer source. So now we have recovered the phosphorus and nitrogen, we can add it back to soil. But biochar has some properties all by itself that are positive for soil. You can add it to soil. A big one is you're adding carbon into the soil. Okay? And that biochar, it's a pyrolyzed carbon. It can last in soil for centuries. Think about some of these greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, that's being emitted and increasing in our atmosphere. One of our goals as a society is to take some of that carbon and put it back in the ground, and biochar can do that. So if we can incorporate biochar into agricultural practices, that's essentially carbon sequestration. It's taking carbon and putting it in the ground in a form that's going to be locked up for centuries.
Wow.
And so that's one of the benefits of biochar. Now, so we get carbon sequestration. But not only do we get carbon sequestration, it also does things that make the soil better or makes the soil healthier. Adding biochar has benefits. It makes the soil microbes happier. It adds nutrients. It makes plant utilization of nutrients better. It makes water more available to the plants in the soil. And so there's just a lot of very good benefits from adding biochar to a soil. And our research is really, well, okay, we can take advantage of that, but we can also use it to remove some of those nutrients from the dairy waste streams. And now the biochar has all those original benefits plus the recycled nutrients, the phosphorus and the nitrogen. And so that's really what we're targeting. And the scientific community, I should say, has a term for that. It's called biochar-based fertilizers. It adds to the benefit of adding the biochar to the soil by having those nutrients associated. And again, so that's going to offset some of the cost to the farmer of adding the biochar, because now they don't have to purchase fertilizers or as much fertilizer, because they're using that recycled nitrogen and phosphorus on the biochar. So they get the benefits of the biochar and they get those recycled nutrients. So it's really creating a product that has value.
It's just so amazing to me because it's not only sustainable and like environmental, but it's also taking that box of it's economically feasible. So it's kind of bridging that both of those. You're talking about bioeconomy. It's perfect.
Yeah, no, that's the concept. It's perfect in concept. The reality is and that's why we're doing research. We're trying to figure out how best to make it work. I mean, obviously we know there's potential here and we think we can get it to work, but it's a research project and we're trying to understand, well, how best do we recover those nutrients on the biochar? And also, which soils is the biochar most beneficial for? Some soils don't. I mean, you can add the biochar and you're going to see really very little effect on plant.
Or you have different kinds of biochar and then you're sourcing it from different places and kind of factoring in the cost of that too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different elements once you start getting into like the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah, no, and I call them variables. There's a lot of different variables, and really we need to understand those to know best how to use the biochar and recover the nutrients. So there's a lot of questions, and that's why we're doing research. We think we're on a good track. We've got some very positive results, but we aren't. It's not a ready to go to market technology quite yet. Yeah. At least from our perspective. There are some people that are really trying to make businesses out of this, but there's still quite a bit of research that needs to be done to really understand how best to do this.
So when it comes to blending the manure with the biochar, what does that process look like?
Well, so far, I think blending manure or compost with biochar could have a lot of benefits, and there are people in this ISAID project that are working on that research front. Our focus has been more the dairy effluent. Think of these lagoons that are on dairies, and so it's just essentially the washout from the
Slurry kind
yeah,
of stuff,
yeah.
liquid manure.
And yeah, it's the liquid. One area we're working on too right now is anaerobic digest effluent. So we're working more with these liquids that are, I mean, really difficult to deal with on dairies because there's a lot of nutrients in them. They're expensive to handle and move. We're working trying to take that liquid, that effluent, and react it with biochar, and then we get this nutrient-loaded biochar. So we're combining essentially that dairy effluent liquid and biochar, which sounds easy, just mix them together, but it's not so easy. How do you get the biochar back out
Yeah.
of the water or liquid effluent? And what are the properties of it? Then that might be beneficial.
And you have to find a way to do it to where it's giving the same results, each time. And that's kind
Yes.
of, I would imagine,
Yeah,
challenging.
it is challenging. We are working at multiple different scales for our research. We have research going on at essentially a lab bench, and we have research going on where we've got a 40-foot trailer with 300-gallon tanks and reactors, and we bring them out to the anaerobic digesters or the dairy ponds, and we pump that effluent into our reactors and recovering a large amount of nutrient enhanced biochar. So we're working at multiple scales, and in the laboratory, we really try to focus in on how some of these variables affect our nutrient recovery and biochar recovery process. And then in the field scale, we really trying to address, okay, this is how it's going to scale up, and the dairyman might be able to incorporate it and address those issues of variability that you were talking about. Because you get variability hourly basis sometimes with this effluent coming out of the anaerobic digesters or the different seasons, or so it could be highly variable. And there's variability inherent in our treatment process and the biochar that we're using. Every biochar behaves a little bit differently depending on what the feedstock that was used.
You mentioned the 40-foot trailer. So that's the clean water machine.
Yeah.
I've kind of mentioned it a little bit on the podcast in previous episodes. It's a pretty exciting development. Could you kind of give a little bit of an overview of
Sure.
how it works?
Yeah. So the clean water machine, it's really a concept more than well, it's both. It's a concept and it's actually 40-foot flatbed trailer that has these tanks and reactors on it. But it's not necessarily a specific thing. It's more like, think of it like a 40-foot trailer with essentially a Lego kit where you can put different pieces on it depending on what you're trying to do. So we do research on all kinds of waters, everything from groundwater to river water to municipal wastewater. And now on this project, we're working on dairy effluent wastewater. So depending on the type of water we're trying to work with, depends on what we're going to put on that trailer and essentially what type of reactors and equipment we're going to put on it. And so every water is different and has different challenges. And so for this, we just last spring did one trial at an anaerobic digester at a dairy, and we were trying two different type of filtration technologies to add biochar and recover it with the nutrients. And only one of them really showed very much promise. The other one looked okay, but we didn't think it was going to progress as well as we had hoped. And so that's what we do with this trailer is we develop these reactors, these filters, and these equipments, and we go down, we do a pilot trial, 300 gallons at a time of dairy effluent, and then we'll make some observations and see how well it works, and then come back to the lab, do some data interpretation, and then come up with our next experiment. And so we're hoping this fall to go back down and bring our clean water machine with different pieces on it that we think are going to work best for our next trial to really treat that water, dairy effluent water, and recover the most nutrients we can on the biochar.
So, what specific technologies are being used on the clean water machine that are showing the most promise?
In our current development, we're using what's called a rotary bed filter, which essentially is a conveyor belt that actually is a filter. So the effluent will go onto the conveyor belt and the solids will be retained and the liquid will go through. And so we're incorporating biochar and we're trying to understand some of how we might alter some of the chemistry of the water to really recover the most biochar and some of those solids, suspended solids in the water on this rotary bed filter. And I think this really shows some promise for development. I mean, it's a known technology that wastewater treatment plants have used, but really integrating it with the biochar and doing some novel wastewater treatment chemistry, we think we're going to really be able to recover the most nutrients on the biochar. So it's really, I think that's one of the things we're really pursuing right now. And it can be scaled up to be able, like I said, it's used, these rotary belt filters are used at wastewater treatment plants. So it's already available. It's just we're applying it with the biochar and this dairy waste and some novel wastewater treatment process to really optimize its use and recover the biochar. So it can be scaled up eventually, the industry scale for anaerobic digestion units or for dairy pond treatment. Greg Muller is a professor here at University of Idaho. He and I are working partners on this project, almost all aspects of the project. I have a little bit more focus on some of the end use of the product, and he's more focused on the front end on how the filtration technology can be optimized.
Okay.
But we really work, on all the aspects together. It's been a great partnership working with Greg. I think one opportunity that we would have eventually, I don't think we're there yet, but if we can simplify the water. So if you think about wastewater treatment, let's talk about a municipal wastewater treatment plant. They have primary treatment, secondary treatment, and tertiary. So as you go along from primary, secondary, tertiary, you're removing more and more. And by tertiary, you got really clean water.
Yeah. And this is a tertiary step, right? The clean water machine is, in theory, a tertiary step. Yeah, that's what it was.
Maybe a secondary, tertiary. And so your anaerobic digester effluent or your dairy pond effluent, it is very far away from being secondary.
Yeah.
And so for us to go into use some of our technology that we can really produce clean, very clean water, we need to get that dairy effluent much cleaner before it can go to that tertiary step. So we're still at that primary step on the dairy wastewater.
So essentially like a whole different machine would technically be made for that first part, and then the actual clean water machine would come in and purify that afterwards.
Exactly. And we have the technology to do that. It's not that we can't do it.
It's just that expensive.
It's too expensive.
Yeah.
So that's always the challenge is, you have all of this wastewater from dairies, and unlike in a municipal wastewater treatment plant, they have money. We all as taxpayers pay for those. The dairymen don't have those resources to do all the treatment. And so the trick is finding the technologies that are going to be economically feasible to treat that water. And if we could get it simplified enough, I call it simplified or clean enough, then we could eventually use some of the other elements of the clean water machine to do that tertiary treatment and produce pristine and completely reusable water. But I think we're a ways away from being able to do that economically. I think we have the technologies, and as the industry gets more and more pressure and more resources to pay for that technology, there are cases where it will be integrated to do more of that primary and beginning secondary treatment process. And this is where it's been great to be on a collaborative team because I'm now talking about water treatment stages, which I am not necessarily an expert on. I'm just learning about. But Greg Muller and other collaborators on project like Eric Coates, they're really experts on wastewater treatment.
Yeah, I interviewed Eric Coates a couple episodes ago.
Yeah, so just being on this project with those kind of experts, I'm learning from them about wastewater treatment and what's feasible. It really has made a great collaborative teamwork project and how we can address some of these issues. And I keep coming back to this, but it's addressing it economically. If we can't do it, we can do it. But if we can't do it economically, it's not feasible.
Yeah,
adopt it.
Exactly.
So that's always, I think, one of the major challenges for discovery of technology is trying to make it more economical. Which comes back to really one of the major aspects of this grant is, essentially enabling and stimulating the bioeconomy by creating value-added products. If we can recover this biochar with that phosphorus and nitrogen on it, then now it has value. And people are willing to pay for it. And so there we've essentially injected money into the system to help pay for some of this more advanced water treatment technology.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just like the bioplastic, creating value-added products that are not only being more environmental friendly, but also creating an alternative revenue stream.
Exactly. So and that's why these two examples are kind of why that concept of this bioeconomy is the overall umbrella of this ISAID project is because, we can make technology, but we got to create value out of these things to really make them feasible for using in the industry.
So when it comes to biochar combined with manure, what are the potential benefits for farmers in using these recovered nutrients compared to traditional fertilizers?
Well, there's several benefits. One is just using a recycled product. I mean, that's good for the environment. To get phosphorus fertilizer, traditional phosphorus fertilizer, it comes out of a mining operation. It costs money. It's not good for the environment. So if we can recycle those nutrients, then it's just a more sustainable practice. Number two, they could be cheaper than traditional fertilizers because they're recycled. And another aspect is adding them to the soil with biochar. It really is what we call this enhanced efficiency fertilizer. It's not just providing phosphorus and nitrogen, you're providing this biochar-based fertilizer that really has a lot of synergy with healthy soil properties and processes. And the plants respond to that by growing better. You get better water use efficiency in the soil, which is a big thing in the West where we rely on irrigation and limited water resources. And so it's really this beneficial product that's more sustainable, will improve the economics, and will even be a better amendment for the soil as opposed to conventional fertilizers.
I've heard that you've done some plant trials. Have you compared the biochar to the fertilizers, like done side by side kind of comparisons?
Yes. We just completed a greenhouse growth trial. We use the plant lettuce just because it's, I kind of call it the white rat of the plant growth studies. In animal studies, they always use these little white mice or rats. And I like using lettuce because it's just an easy plant to grow. It's got a simple plant growth, and it's easy to evaluate. Anyway, so we grew the lettuce, and we grew one in using a conventional fertilizer. We grew one set using a biochar-based fertilizer. This is a biochar that was enhanced with recycled nutrients. And we had a set of plants that grew without any additions. And then we evaluated them when the lettuce mature, and we evaluated them for nutrient content and just how much lettuce grew, biomass essentially. And the conventional fertilizer and the biochar-based fertilizer were almost equivalent. There was a little less production on the biomass, and it was much better than the plants that didn't receive anything, both the biochar-based fertilizer and the conventional fertilizer. And so that's a big deal. I mean, imagine we just used all recycled fertilizers and got almost the same amount of plant growth as a conventional fertilizer. conventional fertilizer costs money. For our trial, we had to go to the store and buy conventional fertilizer. Farmers have to buy that conventional fertilizer, they're paying money, versus this recycled biochar-based fertilizer, and we got almost the same growth. It was just a little bit less, which
would kind of be counteracted with the cost of the fertilizer anyway.
Yeah.
Probably more so.
Yeah, and I think we could get, they would have been equal if we added just a little more biochar-based fertilizer, or if we would, some people propose adding, you can add biochar-based fertilizer and a little bit of conventional fertilizer, just to kind of top it off, so to speak. So I think, maybe adding 10% of the normal
rate. Make like a blend.
Yeah. So that was really promising. I'm really encouraged. We just submitted that work to get published in a journal. We're hoping it goes through. But it's research. Like I said earlier, we aren't there yet. I think this is promising. It shows promise. But really what we're trying to do is how can we get more nutrients off that biochar and recover more out of that dairy waste effluent. That's really our goal. And eventually this biochar-based fertilizer might be able to produce even more than a conventional fertilizer.
Yeah, exactly. I heard also you guys have been doing some field plot trials in Parma.
Yeah, that was really, we're pretty excited about getting that going. Just, there's a lot of questions that you can address by doing field-based research. You can imagine that growing plants in the field versus the greenhouse, it's just going to be a lot of different things that you can measure and take account for and evaluate.
Well, you have weather and pests and stuff.
Yeah.
There's just a lot, like you said, variables that
and irrigation.
Mess with the experiment.
Yeah, so it's more challenging to do field plots, but it's very important and it's a part of the research process. And so this is very early research. We created one biochar-based fertilizer using some recycled nutrients from the University of Idaho dairy right here in Moscow. We essentially mixed biochar with some of the dairy pond effluent. Then took that material with our collaborators down in Twin Falls, actually, Kimberly. We planted some experimental plots testing, again, this biochar-based fertilizer versus a conventional fertilizer versus untreated. And we planted corn in that, and our collaborators were really great working with them down there to get all that plot started. And then we're going to evaluate how well the corn grows, how are the soil properties changing, and get some information from that. And then we'll get that information. We're continuously improving our nutrient recovery process on the biochar. So next year, we hope to do another trial where we can add biochar-based fertilizer that even has more nutrients. It's just part of the research process. You're continuously trying to improve it and make it better. So that's kind of the feedback process we get. We do some field trials, we do some plant growth, we're doing some wastewater treatment trials, trying to recover more of those nutrients, and getting that feedback between the two really allows us to say, yeah, this is the direction we want to go, and continue the research until eventually we'll have, hopefully something that can be used in the industry.
With the corn trials, have they sent you any pictures or like recent updates of?
No, I'm due for an update though. I every day I go, oh, don't forget to send an email, see how that's going. I do have some pictures from the initial installation, and it's been about 2 months now. So I think they're probably getting ready to harvest here next month.
That'll be exciting to see that.
It will. Sure. Yeah. I'm gonna reach out and see how that's going.
So looking ahead, what are your goals for the future of this research?
So we're trying to come up with really technology that can recover those nutrients on the biochar. I think we're on a good track right now, but we're not there yet. We're going to be, this fall, we're going to do a new pilot mobilization down to an anaerobic digester at a dairy in southern Idaho. And we're going to be trying some of our new ideas out to see how they work and if we can really get more of the nutrients out of the wastewater. Currently, we're doing lab work on some different technologies that we think are going to make the process work better. And we're getting some good feedback from the results, but I think over the next few weeks, we're really going to hopefully make some kind of some breakthroughs that we think this is what really good. This shows good promise, and we want to try this in the field to see how it works. And so that's what we're going to do this fall. And then if we recover that biochar from the treatment process, we hope it has even more nutrients, and we want to do some plant growth trials. We'll probably do them, because we're going into winter after that, we'll probably do them in a greenhouse, growing some lettuce. And then if that looks promising, then we'll plant some field amendment trials next spring. And next spring, we'll probably have new ideas that we want to try for the treatment technology. So it's just a continuous process of, how can we get more of those nutrients out of that wastewater? How can we make a better biochar-based fertilizer? And then once we do recover that, what is its value and how does it work when amended to soil? We're recovering nitrogen and phosphorus. We can make a biochar-based fertilizer, but we're probably only removing, 10, 20% of the total nitrogen or phosphorus. Oh, wow. There's still a lot there to get.
Huh. Yeah, I had heard it the other way.
Yeah, no, it depends on the water. I mean, if we go back to this different water treatment stages, if we were treating a secondary water, we can remove 95 or more.
That's what it was. Yeah. Because I knew it was around 90 from the statistic.
Yeah, no, essentially we can remove 99% of the phosphorus from the secondary water and to make it tertiary treated water. We have that technology that's patented by the University of Idaho. Greg Muller invented that. We can use that, but we have to be able to get to that secondary treated water level. So we're still, for dairy effluent, we're still in the primary.
Yeah.
Treatment. So for us, we're like, okay, we're recovering 10, 20, 25% of the total phosphorus and nitrogen. There's still a lot there to get. And like I said, we can use some technology to do it and get 99%, but it's too expensive. We're trying to do it with this technology that make it economically feasible. And so that's our research. We're trying to get the rest of it. The more we can get, the more sustainable it is going to be, the better value the recovered nutrients and the biochar-based fertilizer will be, and the more that value will be able to offset the cost of the treatment. And the better it's going to be to add those nutrients into the soil as fertilizer for plant growth. If you think about it from that, I mean, some people might look at it like, oh, geez, you're only at 20%, and there's still a lot there. I look at that as opportunity. I'm excited as a researcher. Like, there's just a lot of work to do. And there's a lot of potential there, but we got to do the research to get there. So that's my perspective, and that's what I'm going after, is getting the rest of those nutrients out. And I think we can do it. We're not going to do it in 6 months, but with sustained investment and research not just by our group, but other universities are doing research as well. And if we over time, we're going to get there. We're going to get these sustainable nutrient recovery technologies that really can economically be used at dairies.
How do you see your research impacting the agriculture industry, like with plant growth and soil health?
I think the agriculture industry, we're kind of in a bit of a renaissance now in terms of we've really seen we have some real challenges, but we have some great technology. And we're trying to figure out which of those technologies we can use and will we work best, and how can we modify them. And so it's really, if we look at, the history of agriculture in the United States, I feel that we had this real boom in the middle of the 20th century. And then we're starting to see a lot of repercussions in that, whether it's pesticides or nutrients in groundwater and surface water or soil erosion. We're just having a lot of repercussions from the agriculture industry on our environment. And it really impacts the quality of life that we're able to sustain. And so it's really a challenge right now for scientists to come up with technologies that can be used and they can be used economically and to make the whole industry more sustainable. And it's really as a challenge, and that's what, like I said, that's what excites researchers is, yeah, we think we can help. We think we can come up with some solutions. And so it's really, I think, for agriculture and the scientists at the university and the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, these are the things that we're trying to help with, do discovery, come up with technologies. And that's what we're doing with this ISAID project, this collaborative project that all the researchers are taking on different aspects of it. And our part is one part of that overall discovery and technology process.
So, when it comes to scaling this technology up, what are some potential challenges you see arising?
Well, our research, it's really nice, and I think I give a lot of credit to Greg Moeller for this, but we always keep an eye on that aspect. Is this scalable? And not to say that everything we do is, but we really are trying to think about if we're doing something, yeah, we can do it, but it's not scalable. Well, then, okay, put that on the side.
Yeah.
And sometimes we think something's going to work out and it doesn't. It's not that everything's always scalable that we do, but we always try to think about it from that perspective. And it always comes back to if it's going to be scalable, it has to be able to deal with large volumes or of effluent or mass of dairy manure. And it has to be a technology, that you can build essentially bigger machines that can do this, or if you're using biochar, you can access enough biochar to actually treat a whole dairy effluent stream. And so all of these things we think about, and usually if it's clearly not going to be scalable, we'll go back to the drawing board and say, okay. But some things we think are going to be scalable, and we'll start researching it, and we discover that there's a little issue here or issue there that we need to overcome really for it to be scalable. So that's always a concern, and is being able to treat the large volumes and amounts that there are in dairies and to be able to do it economically. To be scalable, it has to be essentially economic to build so that you can treat 15,000 cow dairy. That's a lot of effluent, a lot of dairy manure.
So, when it comes to your research, what are you most excited about?
I think really this concept of biochar-based fertilizers is a really exciting idea. Right now, globally, everybody's really excited about biochar. And I think it is a really neat material for adding to soils for agriculture. However, I think it's being oversold a little bit. But we're kind of changing this idea of adding recycled nutrients to the biochar. That's a whole different material that has a lot more value. This concept of biochar-based fertilizers. I just think that really is going to push this product of biochar even further in terms of its value and utility. It will change how farmers and producers will want to use this biochar material if they can get access to a fertilizer or nutrient enhanced biochar. And so I think that's really one of the most exciting things that we're pursuing in our research, and what I'm really looking forward to continue to develop from our research is the nutrient enhancement of the biochar. Like I said, it's a whole different product that has really a lot more value to add to soils than just biochar by itself.
Definitely. And I mean, personally, from me coming from a dairy background, I find it extremely reassuring that you guys are also, like, obviously, you would look at the economic side of it, but it's nice to have people like considering how hard it would be to implement for the producers, because a lot of people, they want to do all the environmental changes, but they don't have like the economics tied to it, or they overpromise with the dairy goals and stuff.
Yeah, no,
But it's really reassuring to see that I guess both components are involved with the decision making.
It is. And I would say, I am very heavy into research. So what I think is applied and keeping in mind what some of the challenges that a producer might be faced with might be a little bit different than what a producer thinks is important. So that's why this ISAID project is really interesting and good to work collaboratively, because we have people on the extension and education side of the project that really interact quite a bit with producers and dairymen, and we have people researching the economics of the different products that we're developing in this project. So I think that kind of a lot of times grounds me or brings me back to reality. I mean, even something I might think, oh yeah, this is the path forward, and then someone that's a real economic expert will say, yeah, no, not really. Go back to the drawing board and do a little more research. But that's fine. That's part of the process. But it's good, I think, for everybody to really keep in mind, how is this going to benefit the industry?
And I mean, that's why it's such a extreme advantage that the ISAID grant is multidisciplinary, because I feel like you get used to doing something a certain way and stuff, and you know how to do it, but then you consult somebody who knows more about a different specialty that you might, or gives you a different idea about something that you might not have even considered or looked at it from a different point of view. It's an extreme advantage because if you think about it, like that's how the entire world works, from different areas of expertise interacting. So I feel like to solve a problem as big as this, you need a lot of heads in the ring.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's this concept of working with interdisciplinary science and just having people with all different perspectives, viewpoints, and expertise, and trying to bring all those ideas in. And sometimes we'll be doing something and someone that's has different expertise will come in and say, okay, well, what about this or that? And it gives us an idea or a spark on something that we might want to pursue, or it might redirect us from what we're doing. So that's really the advantage of working interdisciplinary.
Definitely. On a more personal note, what drives your passion for this research? Is there a specific aspect of soil chemistry or environmental sustainability that motivates you the most?
Well, it's multifaceted in what drives me. I enjoy research. I think probably the happiest I ever am in my job is when I have new data that I'm analyzing. And I enjoy working with the people. I have students that are coming here helping with the research and getting their education. And I feel good that I'm able to provide them with some experiences on doing research and that they can build their own careers. And then I just go back to, when I was young and starting college, I thinking about what I wanted to do, and I really was passionate about, essentially back then we call it, save the environment. And I thought, I really need to get some at my education so that I can do something about this. And that will help the environment. And so that's why I pursued environmental soil chemistry. All of the research that I do in all of my projects is really trying to come up with solutions to make the environment healthier and better. And I guess if I reflect on my career from that perspective, I feel pretty good. The 19-year-old me would be pretty happy with the career that I've built over the last 30 years. And I think I haven't changed the world maybe completely, but I've made some discoveries. I've educated people and helped the process as a whole.
That is so good to hear. Oh my gosh. That's really sweet.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Man, I'm like teary now. That was so sweet. Man, I hope I feel the same way when I'm older too.
Maybe I can go.
Is there any advice you'd give to aspiring soil scientists and research who are interested in pursuing a career in this field?
I would say, you have to pursue something that you're really interested in, but it's going to be hard. Technology is so advanced now. And if you look at, when you start out, you're like, how am I ever going to, know how to do all this or do research at that level? It's hard. There's a lot of hard work. You have to take classes that may not be necessarily the most interesting, but it's building that foundation, building that knowledge base so that you can become proficient and eventually become an expert. There's a book published several years ago Malcolm Gladwell, I think. He said it takes 20,000 hours to be an expert. And that's 20,000 hours of hard work to become an expert. That's multi years. And I feel like that's kind of an advice I give to students is don't be afraid to do the hard work. Sometimes it's not going to be fun, but if you have a goal, you'll get there. And then you'll realize that you'll be able to do what you wanted, and you have built that essentially ability and skill set to become a professional that you wanted. But you got to stick with it. You got to build that foundation. You got to do that hard work. That's really some of the main advice I have. And we can do it. There's a lot of very talented students here at the University of Idaho and other universities. They enjoy science or whatever they're interested in, and they're really becoming experts, and they're willing to do that hard work. So I'm encouraged by that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, is there anything left you'd like to say about your research?
No, I think I've covered quite a bit. Thanks for the time to talk about it. Be excited to see what comes from our future research and working with our collaborators on this project.
And that wraps up another episode of the Clever Cow podcast. I want to extend a huge thank you to Dr. Daniel Strawn for joining us today and sharing his expertise on biochar, soil health, and the innovative clean water machine. It's inspiring to hear how these research initiatives are paving the way for a more sustainable and resource-efficient future in dairy agriculture. We've covered a lot today, from the challenges and benefits of using dairy manure and soil amendments to the exciting potential of nutrient recovery and carbon sequestration. It's clear that biochar has the power to transform soil management, and the clean water machine could be a game changer for water purification in the dairy industry. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on the latest innovations in sustainable agriculture. You can find us on all major podcast platforms, and if you have any questions or want to learn more about the ISAID Grant and its research, feel free to reach out to us on social media or visit our website. Thanks again for tuning in to the Clever Cow podcast. I'm your host, Savanah Nunes, and we'll see you next time as we continue our journey towards a more sustainable future.